Welcome, everybody, to the show. Joining me is my intrepid co-host and fellow traveler, Dancing Dan, the Dancing Man.
I just
from
love David Thompson.
sunny
Why
Quebec.
does he give us his time? Why?
And special guest, expert witness, David Thompson. Welcome, David. Thanks for coming.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
If I were to
Dan
be
did not see fit to
again,
prep
I want
me.
to be David Thompson.
Dan did not see fit to provide me with the He-Man videos, so we're not going to be seeing that tonight. So sorry about that for everyone who was looking forward to it. So as we start, let me mention that last night's Counterclipping show was a fundraiser for Mark Ruggiero, who's both he and his wife are battling cancer. There is it was completely half-assed on my part, but we were very successful, and I'm very happy with what we were able to get accomplished for Mark last night. For those who would like to help out, the link to their GoFundMe, which is set up by a sister-in-law or something like that, is in the video description. So please do check that out. Please do what you can. Share it if you can't give, and I completely understand because I spent all my money on Labette games. But anyway. Happy to have David here. So tonight's topic, this was sort of sparked by a conversation that I was having about Atlantic Chase with let's call him an industry notable, because I'm not sure, maybe industry notable is not the right term, but I'm not sure he'd be comfortable if I gave you his name, but he had a fairly negative reaction to Atlantic Chase, and he didn't feel like it was telling him much about the history. And I think we have also heard Atlantic Chase described as Schrodinger's convoy, right? Because the convoy's there until it's not, and then it's not. It's in a quantum superposition of there and not there at any given time, right? So that raised the question, aside from issues of presentation, right, and really ease of play, what are the things, if to the extent we could quantify this, right? I mean, everybody's got their own opinion. I've got my own way to approach war games, and Dan's got his way to approach whatever it is that he approaches, and David has his way of approaching fame and fortune. And aside from our personal considerations, are there characteristics of war games that make war game a given war game good, right? In not necessarily in an absolute sense, but which may be independent of the tastes of the person talking about that. So that's why you're here, David. Start talking.
That's interesting. I'm before we get started, I want to hear a little bit more about the negative critique of Atlantic Chase. So it was based on it not informing.
Everyone agrees, including this individual, that it is a marvelously presented game. Okay. And I had but I'm not sure I agree with the critique, but I kind of feel like that's where he's coming from. He didn't feel like he was receiving much about the history other than that, hey, we don't, we're out at sea, we don't know where the enemy ships are, right? Which the game captures in a very, very clever and innovative way. Yeah. But he didn't think that it was delivering the history to him. That's how I take it.
You're not talking about Jeremy White. You're talking about the criticism of Jeremy White.
Of the fellow I was talking to. Yeah, I have not spoken with Jeremy. Jeremy White did not, in fact, tell me he was disappointed in Atlantic Chase. Oddly enough, I imagine Jeremy is quite pleased right today. So
I've got a question on a side question, and I'm glad you're there, David, because you're a war game. And I say this in a good way, shit disturber. You came around and you did your type of gaming, and now it's selling billions. So why and how?
Hold on, was that beeping sound? I hear the sound of the money truck backing up in David's driveway.
No, but what makes David Thompson unique? What makes Jeremy White unique that these games are so good? Why are they so good? Is it the simplicity of it?
Well, I can't speak for Jeremy. I think that Atlantic Chase is the most, I've said this a couple of times before we move on, I think it's the most innovative game, and especially in the war game space, that I've played in forever.
So how does he do that?
Independent of anything else. I don't know. I won't speak for him. I think he's a genius. I think he's amazing. So and the clarity of the rules is unbelievable, right? So I mean, independent of anything else we talk about tonight, I think
box that didn't read. They looked at the rule book, they didn't read it, and they like set it down and were instantly able to play. So
right, yeah,
not even
yeah,
he told me that.
yeah. So I mean, I've talked about this before. For me, speaking for myself, I come at war games from a different perspective than a lot of war game designers because, first of all, I didn't start playing war games, right? Like I didn't grow up on war games. I didn't grow up on board games at all. I only started playing games like about 10 years ago. And I came into the hobby, I came into the entire board game at large hobby at the same time as I did war games. So when I approach game design in general, I approach it from like a different sort of formative experience, right? If that makes sense. So
I understand. And it's funny. You're making me think, I don't know why, of Joni Mitchell. Joni Mitchell was not a songwriter. She was a painter, but she liked cigarettes so much. And she said, let me write a few songs and play that. And there you go.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, I think people are shaped by their experiences, right? And
Yes.
so if you're shaped by playing Hex Encounter, if you grow up on Hex Encounter war games and you turn into a war game designer, it makes sense that that's going to inform you, your tastes and your, just everything about it. So I think it's just, people come from different walks of life. And when you see people, so the other super obvious example of this is when they were running the Zenobia Award, whatever, I guess a couple of years ago now. A lot of the designers, the vast majority of the designers that were designing, in this case, historical, not just war games, were coming from all sorts of different walks of life. And when you look at not just the themes are obviously going to be diverse, but the gameplay mechanisms that are being used is very diverse.
And were they interesting?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously, many of these people were first-time designers, so in some ways, it was very raw, right? But for sure, what you didn't see was a bunch of iterations. Nothing against Coin or any other popular series, but they weren't just iterations off the same thing. They were completely new things because the people designing them weren't, they weren't coming from the experience of, I've done this before, yes, I'll do it again or whatever, right? Yeah.
So that's interesting. That I mean, of course, I always want to at least hear what the new folks have to say, right? Folks who are new to design, maybe new to war games. Everybody was new to war games at one point, right? So insofar as those folks can bring in new ideas, I think that's great. I don't know that innovation in and of itself is necessarily a positive thing, right? I mean, you can have a game that's innovative. There's a whole list of SPI titles that this applies to. A game that's innovative, but maybe doesn't really work, right? As a game that I get. At some point, we'll do the best of Jim Dunnigan, and we'll have that discussion. But great new ideas that maybe that's a breakdown in design, and maybe that's a breakdown in post design, i.e., development. But innovation is great. It brings new ideas, and that's how we evolve. But on like that's kind of something that affects the hobby above the level of the individual game, right? The designers got influence, and other people decide that they're going to take inspiration from whatever innovation we're talking about. And certainly we've seen wave after wave after wave of that in of course the hobby, meeting resistance every time, right? There's still folks that say, I don't play CDGs, they're not war games. Well,
Jesus Christ.
Great. Have that conversation with Mark Herman. You're not going to have
Mark Herman, yeah. Yeah, he might disagree with you.
Mark, get away. Yeah. Get out of here. Yep.
Yeah.
It's funny. I'm wondering where war games are going to be in the next 10 years, because I see GMT's catalog changing quite a bit, man. Quite a bit.
That is not a new phenomenon, right? I've been saying for years that GMT is the closest thing we have right now to Avalon Hill. And part of the reason that I say that is because GMT does a bunch of other stuff, and they have for years, that are not core war games, Hex Encounter war games, or even, the the edgy, like area movement games. Ooh, that's new and that makes me uncomfortable. But they're not necessarily. In these days, they've got tons of stuff that people have debates about whether they're war games or not, and they have stuff that's clearly not, right.
Clearly not. Yeah.
Nobody's out there calling their 18xx titles war games. Although I should start doing that just to twist the wrong people into nipples.
I think, I don't know the specifics, but didn't John Butterfield's new space game like set some GMT P500 records or something?
If it did, it
really well.
Beat out Pacific War. So, which is an interesting factoid, right? Because Pacific War is a groggy old school war game to the max, right? And then the next game that comes in, Away Team from John Butterfield, goes in, and I'm not sure if it beat the record, but certainly
I don't know if it beat the
record.
Well. I know it did. It did really, really, really well, right? And it's clearly not a war game. And it's from John. And obviously, that carries a ton. But just to your point, right? Like GMT, although everybody would agree it's a war game publisher, does plenty of non-war game stuff.
But I mean, even a guy like Volko's shaking up the foundations, not because of coin. Now he's doing this levy stuff, and he's going to Tuscany in the year 8-5 from some unknown bathroom that he found or something, and it makes it interesting. No, but seriously, it's changing everything. The David Thompsons, the Volkos.
Next week, folks, we'll be broadcasting live from Volko's bathroom. Tune in.
You know what I mean? Jesus Christ. And then even Jeremy White, like, what the hell is going on? Now he's doing a submarine game, like, piece the submarine together. See if you can piece it together.
That looks pretty interesting. I was like, it shows up in the monthly thing, and I don't like examine those games closely at that time, right? Over the course, because it ain't going to come out this year. So we've got plenty of time to investigate those titles. That's called Infernal Machine. It's Jerry White and a co-designer whose name I've unfortunately forgotten. Hopefully somebody will know. But I was like, I don't know, whatever. Not super interested. And then I started hearing more about the game through the little updates and people talking about it and stuff like that. I'm like, this looks kind of neat, actually.
You see, it's a Jeremy White game. Something's up. It's a David Thompson game. What the hell did he do now to change everything? What did he do? You see what I mean? The name carries something interesting. Like, if John Butterfield farts on the P500, there's going to be 1,000 people going for it.
Well, I mean, this is kind of this whole conversation, the whole topic is kind of independent of designers in principle, right? Because John Butterfield game, I have a high confidence that it's going to be good.
That's
right.
Right.
Comes out with a new game, unless it's Ribbit Rampage or whatever it is, then I'm just I'm not picking that up. But I have a high confidence that whatever Mark's got in the pipeline is going to be good and interesting, and I'm going to buy it. But what makes them so let's take, I don't want to use Pacific War as an example because it's a game from like 1987. But let's take let's set aside the additional variables that we're introducing in the story by talking about it from the context of a really innovative product like Atlantic Chase, which I think, as somebody pointed out here, is if whatever else you think about it, it is just a game changer in terms of presentation. Let's say everybody agrees that I'm trying to think of an example of a broadly Ardennes 44. Okay. What makes Ardennes 44 good?
You're talking about Simonich's game?
Yeah. And it is good. I love it. I've played it twice. I like it a lot. It's my preferred bulge game at that scale, I think. But what makes it good? And somebody mentioned, and I highlighted the comment and then I lost it, player agency, right? And I think that's certainly a factor. But at the same time, there's games that are highly praised specifically because they take some player agency away, right? I'm thinking in this case of Combat Commander, which I think deprotagonizes the player to a great extent. And that's a thing that I've said in the past. So clearly there's a balance to be struck there between adding unpredictability to the game, which I think is almost always desirable, because it helps you develop the sort of internal narrative of the game, whether it's a narrative driven game or not, right? or um and giving the player stuff to do and decisions to make, right? I mean, I want to be able to make decisions and I kind of have to be able to see the like decision space, right? I have to understand it, and part of this also ties into how familiar I am with this topic, right? We all know something about the bulge, even if it's just from watching that awful movie.
I like it.
It's got its upside, I guess, but it's a dumb war movie. Let's face
For
it.
God's sakes, man.
Drew Dederer says that it isn't so much agency as interesting decisions, and nothing makes it more interesting than not being able to. Yeah, I agree. Perfectly predict the result. This is why I think OCS, one reason anyway, why I think OCS works as well as it does, right? Because you can never know what's going to happen with that surprise roll. I mean, I think I told this story online, but maybe I didn't. No, it wasn't. Somebody was over and I was talking to them. At Winterfest last year, I played Forgotten Battles, which is the next big OCS game coming. And I think I probably rolled surprise 20 times in that game. And I'm not rolling. It's a D6 roll. I got to roll 5 or less to get defender surprise when I'm rolling the dice. That's the other person's surprise. I rolled defender surprise 19 of those 20 times. And I'm rolling at +1 and +2 every time. I mean, I'm not attacking with, penal battalions and stuff, right? Those guys don't get to lead the attack. They're there to soak off the hits. Broke? No, I'm saying the dice hate me, but I mean, the fact is that you look at statistically what's likely to happen, and you are not going to find that to be a statistically likely result, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah, I think that there's an interesting in wargaming. Like what you really want to provide the player is, like we were saying, a lot of player agency, like in terms of like, I understand the decision space and I understand the repercussions of my decisions, but there's uncertainty, right? I think it's also important that the decision space, you want to do more than you're actually able to at any given point, right? So you have to make tough decisions. So you're asking the player, here's a menu of decisions you have to make. You understand the scope. You also don't want them jumping through hoops to try to understand the possible scope, right? So you're not trying to you don't want the game to be too opaque, right, in terms of repercussions of what's possible. But I definitely think you want to provide them more interesting choices than they can possibly choose from in the menu, right? So they have that interesting decision, every time they're asked to make a decision.
So I forgot what I was going to say. Infernal Machine. So somebody should do a game called Infernal Machines about the bomb that they tried to blow up Napoleon with, actually, which was actually called the Infernal Machine. NP Sergio. That's how I'm going to say that. Welcome to the stream. And yeah, I agree with this. There were a lot of very good games.
Yes.
So we're very happy with so the thing with Salerno 43 is it's pretty small, right? And that may appear to provide a somewhat limited decision space, but don't forget it's like the first of a trilogy that's going to cover the whole campaign. So you're going to be able to replay it when the next one comes out, if nothing else.
But let's talk. So your question at the very beginning was what makes a war game good or fun or whatever. And I mean, obviously, before we say anything, that's so subjective, right? There's no answer for that question. But even on this topic of replayability, so there are war gamers like me that of all the games I own, some I will never play, some I will only play once, and some I will play repeatedly. I'm happy with that. I'm totally fine with that. Some I buy knowing I probably won't ever play them. I'll take them out. I'll read the designer notes. I'll lay it out. I'll put the pieces out. I'll look at the sort of like disposition, and that's enough for me. Like, oh, this is interesting. Some I'll play one time because I just want to get the experience of playing the game. And I'm like, oh, that was really interesting. I enjoyed it. I don't need to play it again. That was fine. And all of those I would still classify potentially as good, right? I knew going in that that's what I was going to get out of it. So it's really difficult to apply any sort of metric to try to measure what's good or it's really what you're looking for going in.
But when we say what makes a war game good, obviously you said it's subjective. All war games are good. They all have something to offer. unless it's a crappy game.
Well, okay,
I mean,
but you know, we've seen those from time to time, right?
yeah, no, but I mean, there's something good about every single game. I mean, unless it's a real dud, man, you know.
Well, you know, sometimes we do see real duds. It has happened. Witness the short life of the Fresno Games Association, for example, which did, I don't know, a dozen games or something like that, and like they're all turds. But obviously we have the answer provided by Grog of the Year Jim Ozarski. They're all equally good as long as they have
Respect.
Napoleonic miniatures. As long as the Prussians are purple, it's okay.
Wait, I gotta get Atlantic Chase. I gotta get it.
Okay, Dan's getting Atlantic Chase. So I mean, I think Atlantic Chase is quite neat, right? But I mean, I haven't played all the scenarios or anything like that. I haven't played like the meteor scenarios.
Yeah.
So I'm probably not seeing the full experience of it yet. But certainly, you know, that we're not complaining. Nobody's complaining about the way it's presented, which is a sea change in the way war games are presented. And I'm really curious, and I hope that I'm wrong in saying that my expectation is that the groggier designers and publishers are not going to take the lessons from Atlantic Chase. I hope that we start to see hex and counter games, you know, core war games presented in a way that takes some inspiration from Atlantic Chase without necessarily having copied its presentation, which I'm not sure you can even do.
Hey, why does he say Volume 1? Atlantic Chase Volume 1. What's coming next?
I don't know, but there's supposed to be more. Then again, you know, lots of publishers, including GMT, have a number of series that say Volume 1 and Volume 2 has never appeared. So PQ-17 is one. And actually, I think that's an obvious source of inspiration. And we might have talked about that in a Designer's Nuts, actually. That's a very interesting game. And I think also quite mechanically innovative, but not nearly as abstract as Atlantic Chase. Atlantic Chase largely removes the necessity for hidden information, where PQ-17 is all about hidden information, right? It's the closest thing to a completely unsolitareable game I have ever seen.
So basically, Atlantic Chase is you trying to get away from the U-boats, or the U-boats trying to sink the convoys.
Well, that's part of it. I mean, it's really about the challenges in air naval warfare at kind of the, you know, the Atlantic scale, where we didn't necessarily have good intel about where the enemy fleet was located, right? The new VUCA game about the Bismarck actually looks very good in this case, but it's much more traditional, with a lot of hidden info, to my knowledge. So,
And would you say this is a play again game once you've played it?
I think so. Yeah, I think you could get I think you get multiple plays out of Atlantic Chase. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there's just a ton of content there anyway, right? I mean, yeah.
Atlantic Chase is not about the U-boat war specifically. The U-boat war is kind of in there, but that's not really what it's about. So, yeah, we did get the expansion for PQ-17, which I somehow didn't get. I never pre-ordered it. I'm very bad at maintaining my P500 list from GMT. William Aaron says that that's an interesting way that David has presented us to look at, you know, why we buy games necessarily. And I can, you know, I tell people I only buy games I'm going to play, but I'm A, full of it, and B, there are absolutely games I bought because I wanted to look at, right? I just picked up a copy of Clash of Arms Edelweiss from a designer that has dropped off the Wargaming planet from, you know, not a supported series at all, ancient game. Beautiful Rick Barber maps, though. Very unusual to see World War II maps by Rick Barber and not have them look weird. But
I never seen a World War II Rick Barber map, or is
there's not very many.
What about Ambush? Is that Rick Barber? No,
I have no idea. It sure doesn't look like it. Bob Mosdal, thanks for stopping by. Wargame that can create the historical result is better than one that can't, even if you script the randomness. The historical result may not be probable, but it should be possible. Yeah, I agree. The what I was trying to get out before about the bulge is that, some understanding at some level. You don't have to be like an expert or have written a master's thesis on it, but some level of understanding about the historical events is really very helpful when playing war games. It helps to contextualize that decision space that you're operating in as a player, right? To know, well, the Germans did this here, but it didn't work out. Maybe I should try something different, or maybe I think I can execute it better. So I'm gonna stick with that plan. The World War I Schlieffen plan, right? This is kind of a favorite in World War I circles, right? Can the Germans actually pull that off? And it's tough to pull off, to say the least.
I agree with that. I agree with that comment too. Now I will say that take it to the next level, and the debate about what the most likely outcome should have been, right, is you can get yourself caught up with that. But
yeah, but we often, how do you determine the most likely outcome, right? I not even sure where to start with the list of examples where we got historically what appeared at the time, and even in retrospect appears to have been an unlikely outcome. If you look at the Battle of Antietam, for example, McClellan's got a much larger army there than Robert E. Lee does, and yet, while the Union wins in that they occupy the field at the end of the second day, it's a very costly battle, and it's not like either army got destroyed, right? So you don't necessarily predict that. You look at really anything involving George McClellan is a great example, because he always assumed that he was outnumbered 3-1 by whatever army he was facing. So, so I mean, having that extra context is great, but I would say that a game in which it is impossible to replicate the historical outcome is probably not well designed. Probably
correct,
but it doesn't have to be likely either, right? But that's a design challenge, right? Another great example is France 1940, right? You look at the French; their army is huge. At the tactical level, they're quite good, with some admitted problems with the tanks and communication and stuff. And yet they completely shit the bed at the strategic decision making level. So that looks like a pretty unlikely outcome, and a lot of designers doing games on France 1940 have struggled with how to make that work as a game, because what do you just give the Germans twice as many factors as the French? There are games that have done that. And does that make sense? No, of course it doesn't. So how does one address this I'll send over to David. How does one address that kind of disparity where it's not an even battle? There isn't parity between the forces, and yet you have to make a game out of that.
Yeah, so I can only speak to it in one personal experience as a designer in one instance, and I may have talked to you guys about this in a recent discussion as an example, but that's exactly what happened with when I was designing Lansworth Ridge, right? So there's no reason that the Americans should have held out on Lansworth Ridge. They were outnumbered like 500 to 20. So if you're and it's interesting, I haven't played it, but there's a combat commander scenario for it, and I would love to go and look at the combat commander scenario and see how it makes it an interesting game, because I don't know how you give both players agency in the game and it's not an overwhelming victory for the Germans every time. Maybe it's some kind of crazy victory condition or something. I mean, that's one way to do it, right? You have a victory condition that hand waves it. But my cop out was to make it a solitaire game so that I can make the German AI as stupid as the actual German leadership was during the battle. And I mean, I say that, but I'm serious. Like, the AI literally just keeps running up the hill because that's what the Germans did instead of flanking the Americans. So that's the easy way out. But if you're designing a solo game, you can do that. But if you have a true challenge where you're actually giving both players agency, you have to start either you get really creative with victory conditions, or you start to have to hamstring a player in some way that feels artificial, right? Because you're trying to achieve some, usually like command and control or leadership breakdown that's hard to model in a game like that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And as Peter Rushton points out, France 1940 is about command, right? Command pretty much at all levels above companies, probably, or battalions, where the Germans are just better. They're just better, and one sees that in American Civil War as well, especially early on in the war before the Union had kind of built good leadership up at the divisional level and up. So,
Hey, there was a good question here. Where does Dave get his Jeff Beeler? How does Dave Thompson pick his games topic for possible popularity or personal interest?
It depends on, so if it's a game that I'm like, if it's a Valiant Defense game or a game for DVG, it's what I want to do. If it's a game for like Osprey for Undaunted, we talk about the topic, and it's not like I'll give you an example. We knew we were going to do Undaunted North Africa before Normandy ever came out, right? But if you're a mainstream board game publisher, you're not going to come out with Undaunted, Malaya or something, right? Like it's going to be Normandy, right?
Right.
But then after Normandy, it was, hey, we want to mix it up. We want to have different nationalities. What can we explore? And they're usually open. Like I came back and I said, hey, let's do North Africa, but not only North Africa, but like the LRDG versus the Italians, right? Which is not going to sell the most number of copies, but they were okay with it. So if it's me doing my own thing with DVG, then it's whatever I want. And if it's with a bigger publisher that's commissioning something, it's a conversation.
What, having the Italians doesn't sell? What the hell is that?
That because it's not about
the hell is that?
That's actually a good point, as maybe outside the topic of the show is
come on.
When you're talking about a game series or a product line, right? Is how do you position it to have momentum moving forward, right? So that you have a steady pipeline of support materials or new games, whatever, however you're going to do it, and yet to kind of to start strong, right? Start with a topic that's reasonably popular, to grab people with, which is, I think, one reason for the success of BCS, because they started out with the Bulge, right? It's one of the the most mainstream war game topics, right? Everybody's played Bulge games, even me. And I hadn't played a Bulge game, I don't think, at least it covers a whole battle, until like 6 or 7 years ago. But how do you maintain that momentum, and then how do you make sure you don't lose it, right? If you don't have a strong pipeline going because your guys are overstretched at MMP, I'm looking at you with Line of Battle, and then you do a game about an obscure battle like, say, Monocacy Junction and Fort Stevens, and it's a battle that lots of folks are not particularly familiar with, and then you haven't released anything in 5 years. That's you're gonna lose. Dan should really have a cooler ringtone than that. I'm gonna complain about that.
Jesus,
that's a pretty lame ringtone, I think, for Dan. I mean, if I was Dan, I'd have my own music playing on the ringtone.
God damn it!
And I would be calling myself all the time.
Yeah, I mean, at least from my perspective, so I think it's a really good question, and obviously everybody handles this differently, and it'd be a great question for like GMT about coin or whatever. But for me, there's two things.
Coin is the perfect counter. Go ahead, but coin is like the perfect counter example to that. All the topics are most of the topics are relatively obscure.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Right. I think for me, the main thing is, first of all, I'm not doing this for my job, right? So I don't have to worry about the money, which is a liberating thing. But what I am spending a bunch of time is, is time, right? So whatever I'm doing, I'm spending a bunch of time doing it, and it's my hobby, so I want to enjoy it. And so when I'm working on, so there's two main war game series I work on, right? Undaunted and Valiant Defense. And I don't want to just keep doing the same thing. And I don't think I don't think it's fair to ask people to keep buying the same thing. And so you have Undaunted Normandy, and then North Africa is a very different scale. And then Reinforcements allows you to play solo or teams. And then Stalingrad gives you a persistent campaign. Like every one of them is very different, even though it's the same core system. And so in the best case situation, if people love the system, they'll buy all of it and they'll play all of it. But minimally, what you're asking a person to do is make a decision about which of those things they want most. Do you want to play solo? Well, here's the answer. Do you want to play a campaign? Well, here's the answer. And then, I try to position the Valiant Defense game similarly, right? Try to come up with one that's a good intro, try to come up with one that feels different, operational level integration. So that's the intent, is that for me to have something I enjoy working on, and then also make sure that each of them feel like they're an interesting choice for a person.
But Dave, in the Valiant Defense series, you've only touched World War II. There's
that's the same with Undaunted. It's all World War II. We've talked about this, though. That's a whole different subject. There's a very specific reason for Valiant Defense, and that's because of the scale of the games requires a ton of historical research at the individual person level, and it's really hard to do that if you go back past World War II. And when I say individual level, I mean literally every single person that was in the battle, right? And so if I'm going to research about a PFC, good luck doing that, in the Civil War or the American Revolution with every single person that was in the battle. So that's just a different reason of why I stick with usually World War II at that scale, because it's actually realistic to do that.
Roger Hempstead says that the Bulge is popular, but there's less need to force a player with special rules to do one thing or the other, like Market Garden. I actually don't necessarily agree with this. There were a lot of things that are replicated in most Bulge games, like road congestion and bridges collapsing because the tanks are too heavy and stuff like that you do need, generally speaking, special rules to deal with.
Chrome rules.
From Chrome rules, and that's Chrome what rules. They are, right? They're rules that are put in there to replicate it into some measure the specifics of a given situation, right? Even where your core mechanisms may not be reflecting them to the to the degree that you would like. So wait, I miss it. I don't know if you could say this or not, but Trevor asks, what's next for the DVG solo system?
Well, okay, so the next game, I think I always forget, man, because I'm a horrible person. So Vince Cooper's working on Guadalcanal.
Ooh.
So it's not me. I'm not the designer. So Vince is, and he's doing Guadalcanal. Nils Johansson's doing the art, just like he did the art for Lansworth Ridge. So it'll be gorgeous. So it'll be the first Valiant Defense game not designed by me. So I don't know which the next one I will do. I still want to do a Siege of Jodetville game, which would be not World War II. So we'll see. Maybe I'll do that. I'm not sure, but I want to just help Vince out right now, so that's what I'm focused on.
So I mean that'll be interesting to see that for Guadalcanal. But I think we've asked this question before, but that's never stopped us. How does one find the topics? Do you just stumble across this bizarre situation about Castle Litter where the Germans are fighting alongside the Americans? And you, thank you, Jeff Beeler, much appreciated. I don't even know what he's talking about. But I mean, how do you go out looking for these topics, or did you just kind of make a mental note when you heard about the Danzig post office, for example?
Yeah, no. So each one kind of comes about separately, right? So like Castle Litter was the first designed, and I even started to confuse myself now. Castle Litter was the first designed, and when I was close to the end of it, I put a call out on VGG and it said, hey, it was in a war game design competition. So a lot of people had seen it. And so a lot of people were familiar with it. And I put a call out and somebody recommended Pavlov's House. And I knew about Pavlov's House to some degree. I didn't know the full story.
As does every ASL player.
Right. And video gamer, it appears everywhere, right? Of all the Valiant Defense things, it is by far the most popular. So I did not know the full true story about it, right? And so that was pretty easy. And then the same thing happened with Soldiers and Postmen's Uniforms. I asked, after I was finished with Pavlov's House, I put a call out and a bunch of people replied. And Michael Kochman, who worked with me on the game on the historical research side, recommended it. And I didn't know anything about the post office defense in Danzig. And so I read about it and I instantly was like, yeah, we're definitely doing that. So I think, and then I don't remember how I heard about Lansworth Ridge. I don't think that one was me. I think I just read about it in passing and said, oh yeah, this would work for Valiant Defense game.
That seems
So they
to
just
be a
from different
perfect
places.
perfect fit rather perfectly, right?
Yeah. Yep.
So
But hold on, going back to the Danzig post office thing, I mean, that was the ruse that started World War II, man.
Well, I mean, it wasn't really a
well,
ruse. It was just the first moments of the war. They knew that was coming, but it wasn't.
Yeah, but
I
they
mean,
used that as an excuse. Like they're
well,
German,
it wasn't
the
the
German
post
guys got
office though.
killed, you know. But it was bullshit.
Yeah, but that was like a week earlier or something like that. I mean,
Yeah, it wasn't. That wasn't part
it
of the
was a
post
few
office
days
attack.
later that they got
Oh,
the I
okay.
mean,
Sorry, my
they didn't have
mistake.
to
My
go very
mistake.
far to get to Danzig. I mean, that's not like the spark that's not the Fort Sumter of World War II, right?
Yeah.
It just happened pretty early, and I guess I'll mention, as the ASL people will know, even though they don't watch this show because it's dirty. There's an ASL scenario for the Danzig post office as well.
Oh,
because of
I didn't
course
know
there
that.
is.
I didn't know that. Yeah, there's an ASL
Yeah, I'm
scenario.
thinking of the radio
There's
station.
usually multiple ASL
Thanks,
scenarios
Mike.
for everything.
Bob Mostal says, has found a thing that makes a game good based on BGG's Wargames that allows you to make a plan. It can't be easy. It may not work, but if it keeps you from planning or destroys your plans, you don't like it. So, I mean, I'm a subscriber. I actually used this at a meeting at work not too long ago. Eisenhower's quote about planning is essential, but plans are useless, right? Because your plan's going to go in the can as soon as you begin to execute the plan. Something unpredicted will occur, and you'll have to figure it out, right? But the planning that you did the plan is in fact essential, and to some extent you want to stick to your plan too, right? If you've decided to go with a specific strategy, you kind of want to execute that strategy, right? And you'll end up probably with a more cohesive result. I mean, like a more favorable result for yourself if you had a plan and stuck with it, even if the plan was flawed and if it didn't work, than you would have had you had you not planned and just kind of played by the seat of your pants the whole time, right? And I completely agree with the statement too. I mean, I think there's a lot of games in which maybe Atlantic Chase is one of them, in which planning is not necessarily a factor, but there's other games, Jeremy White's Enemy Coast Ahead games, in which there's a huge campaign game that revolves all around the planning, which is kind of awesome.
I think so.
So GWG Gaming says that the Lanzerath map art is fantastic. I mean, it's a great looking game. All that stuff from DVG is generally pretty great looking. So
yeah.
So let me ask this, actually. This is not germane to the topic in any way, but how did the relationship with DVG get started? Was that like, did you approach them or did they approach you? Did you have a design at that point to pitch to them, or?
I'm trying to remember. I have a horrible memory. So originally, back in the days of Victory Point games still being around, I had pitched, or they had reached out to me. I think I pitched Castle Itter to them, and it was signed by Victory Point Games, and it just sat there. And so I said, when I came out with Pablo's House, I said, hey, let's look at who's out there, right? And now this time, this is 2016, 17, 18, something like that. I forget. I was just starting to get into design. And so I looked, and it was fairly obvious that the DVG was, if not then one of the top solo war game publishers.
Yeah.
Right. And I was like, well, this seems like an obvious thing. So I just sent Dan an email and I said, hey, here's a game. It's a solo war game. What do you think? And he liked it. And then Victory Point wound up being bought or dissolved. I don't really understand. Whatever Dan Yarrington's company that acquired it ultimately.
They got
the rights back.
They got acquired. I would imagine that I think that happened after you were already with DVG.
So how did you get Castle Itter back?
So if the publisher usually we can talk about contracts for 17 podcasts or video chats, but usually if you're smart, you have in your contract that if the game doesn't get published within a certain period of time, the rights revert back to you. And so they didn't publish it for a couple of years, and so I just got the game rights back. So that's why when I always talk about Castle Itter being number one in the series, and people say no, Pablo's House was published first, and I was like, well, the Castle Litter was designed first, so I consider it number one. But I mean, the same thing happened with Undaunted. It was signed by a publisher that just never published it, and so it ultimately got picked up by Osprey.
And so I'm curious, David, how much time do you give a publisher to publish?
Could be in the
contract.
2
years. 2 years is
right?
the standard. This is standard, yeah. Yep. Yeah, and I mean, 2 years is fair because publishers need time to do all the work that they're supposed to do for a game, right? But
I don't know. It seems a little optimistic to me.
So I'll say you don't have to take the game back, but you can usually tell within 2 years if the publisher is actually making a good faith effort, and you can decide if you want to let them keep it. But
is that your
in
option?
both cases, I didn't see the game really going anywhere, so I just took the game back.
Yeah, and that happens, right?
Yeah.
A company will have a game, and they'll say, "This is a great idea, we love it," and then there's some kind of change that changes their perspective, or the personnel changes, or something like that, and it just
shit happens.
Yeah,
I mean, the reprint of Pacific War went through that twice, right? So
right, yep.
So and
it did
fairly well.
Yes, pretty okay. Pretty okay. Yeah, Guadalcanal will be at a different scale. So that's an interesting thing. People have pitched me tons of ideas about Valiant Defense games at other scales, and I'm not personally interested in that myself. I like the skirmish, the one counter equals one person scale. But Vince was very interested in doing, and it's probably it's Henderson Field, really. I mean, but it's still not one. Obviously, it can't be one person, one counter for that, right? So it will be the first Valiant Defense game that's at a different scale.
So that's actually quite interesting. Meandering Mike Tabletop Tycoons is the company that bought.
That's it. Yeah.
Victory Point Games, and I guess they bought it for the sake of Nemo's War and that others. They had no idea what to do with that other stuff. Some of that has been handed off to either back to the designers, or handed off to another publisher, maybe via the designer. I know the Napoleonic 20 series is supposed to get redone by Decision Games at some point. But I have heard very little on any progress that they may be making with that. There you go. This is a great idea. Hougoumont at Waterloo, where the British held this fortified manor house for like the whole day, and the French just couldn't take it.
It's good. I've actually looked at that one. I've actually looked at it. So yeah, there's one thing you'll know when you start looking into it is there's no shortage of good options.
Yeah, that's true. But at the same time, not every game is going to necessarily work with every topic, right? So
yeah,
you're going to find that somebody's going to suggest that you do an East Front game, the whole East Front, using the Valiant Defense system. And you'll be like,
well, it's actually, there's two things. It needs to fit the system, but also, and I would submit that the game needs to have something more than just a different setting and theme to it, right? Like, it needs to introduce something different, or you're just reskinning it, and so that's another challenge, right?
Would you use that system in a fantasy setting, or in a could happen setting? What type Bamba? What type of games does he do? What's that word I'm trying to get?
Alternate history.
Hypothetical. Would you use that system in a hypothetical?
I'm not. Well, I mean, I guess all games are hypothetical, but
yes,
you
but
mean
that's
like
a fatuous point.
You mean like You mean like alt history, like radical?
Yeah, alt history.
Yeah,
alt history, yes.
NATO nukes and Nazis, or Mississippi Banzai.
It's an interesting. Like if it's sci-fi, like if it's crazy different, then yeah, that's interesting to me. If it's like this battle was slightly different, and what could have happened, that's just, I would much rather dig into the history, the actual history, and reflect that than some slight ahistorical tweak or whatever.
I'm with David on this. I am also considerably more interested in the actual history. as
Yeah.
you then
Yes.
mangle in the course of a war game about it.
Yeah, but now we're
Than I
talking
am
big
about
bucks
some
now.
completely hypothetical situation.
We're
I
talking
completely
big
agree.
bucks now. We're not talking about like
Are we
$2
talking big
a
bucks? Remember
month.
the Goldfish Bowl is bigger with fantasy games and science fiction
There you
games, and
go.
alternate history war games are a niche inside a niche inside a niche,
Yeah.
right? So nobody's
Yeah,
going to
that's
hit
not
it.
going anywhere.
I mean,
That's
the
not
best,
going anywhere.
the best, most successful example of such a thing that I could think of was probably Scythe, which has been very popular, very successful. But it's got hooks that drag people in. The fact that it's an alternate history is pretty incidental, really.
I mean, that's sci-fi, right? Like, that's,
I would call it. I think all alternate history games are sci-fi, frankly, because in literary circles, that's considered a branch of sci-fi. I've been over this with Brant all the time. Yes, same category as that Narnia game. William Aarons, thank you so much. Labatai is the deep end of the pool. That is for sure. This is absolutely true, but at this level, we said this. We at some level, sure, but are you starting from a historical basis, or are you just making it up, right? Or extrapolate to be kinder about it, to extrapolating from historical events.
Yeah, what's the design intent, right? That's the question.
And that's I think really critically important, actually, is what is the designer in any game, whether it's a war game or whatever, what is the designer trying to do? Is it a particular point that the designer is seeking to illuminate through this game, right? And my favorite example of this kind of design ethos is Dean Essig, right? Because every one of those games is designed to tell us something about what what happened on not only on those battlefields, but in that kind of conflict, right? That goes all the way back to the Civil War games.
Yeah, that Nils Johansson and I have been we came up with this 3 to 5 minute Market Garden postcard game. Right. And we're flirting with maybe doing some more postcard games. And I've never done anything like that before, but I really enjoy it. But to your point about, I mean, it is a total question of design intent. What are we trying to communicate or convey in 5 minutes about Market Garden, right? And so the very first exercise I went through was, what does a Market Garden game have to do? What does it absolutely non-negotiable? What does it have to be able to communicate? And I made a bulleted list, right? And we kind of debated about a few of those bullets, and we took them off, and what we settled on was what the two of us think that game has to communicate. And I think that's, a designer doesn't always have the luxury of being able to try to articulate in words to the player what their design intent was. But I do think it should be important for the players to go into a game thinking that, right? Like, what's the point of this game? What's it trying to communicate?
You gotta have that guy hanging from the clock tower. You gotta have that guy hanging from the clock tower.
Oh, red buttons? Was that red buttons? I think it was. You have to have that long, boring soliloquy by Roddy McDowell. That'll put everybody to sleep. So I guess we have to answer this, because at least 2 people have asked this question. As for what's the state of For What Remains?
Yeah. So For What Remains was my first ever. So before I discovered the world of board games existing, before I even knew there was such a thing as a hobby, right? I was the guy, and Artie, you can appreciate this. I grew up as a role-playing game guy, right? I grew up on D&D and stuff. And so I would go into, when we were kids.
We can't talk about that tonight.
Yeah, but hey, we can talk about whatever you want to talk. But you would go into those stores back in the day that they would have comic books, and they would have some books, and they would have role playing games.
Yeah.
And in those where I would get my RPG material from. But I would walk into those stores, and in the front window, you might see a copy of Twilight Imperium, right? And I was like, what is that? I don't know what that is. And so it was always like board games were always this kind of like distant thing that I knew kind of existed. So with that context, right, and growing up on D&D and video games like Final Fantasy Tactics and stuff, I started working on a game that eventually would become what was published is For What Remains, right? So I was working on that before I knew that board games existed. But to actually answer the question, so that's my baby, right? That's my firstborn child in some ways. But it didn't sell great, right? Like that's just the hard truth of it. It didn't sell well, and so will there be any more? Probably not, right? Like maybe I'll repurpose some of the. I really like the chit pull system in it, so I might repurpose some of the chit pull stuff. It will always have a special place in my heart, but sales are what dictates what's made, right? And so we probably won't see more of it.
So if I would have had communication from Dan that Uwe wanted to come on tonight, I would have set the topic as gaming in Ohio, and we could have dropped Dan from
drop Dan. That's right. We don't need you, Dan.
So welcome, Uwe. Thanks for coming.
It's my fault, Uwe. It's my fault. I'm sorry.
David and I agree. It is his fault.
Can you shut up, Artie? For God's sakes, I'm talking to Uwe.
Well, I was just listening to David, and David, my advice to you is to take your
I'm
life
trying
savings.
to talk to you, for God's sakes.
Well, he should take his life savings, just print his next game. If it sells enough, who cares?
Sake.
That's what the rest of us do.
Yeah.
As they say, how to make $1 million in the game industry, right?
Yeah, start with $1 billion.
Yeah.
Uwe, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I didn't
and
know.
Welcome to Mo's Game Table, who has just joined us in the chat. Mo, welcome. Thanks for coming.
Hey, Mo.
This is a great question. What a great question.
Next week, please be on. Please be on next week.
Sure.
Look how beautiful you are. Yeah, I thought David Thompson.
Plans are useless,
You're
but
just
planning
blowing
is
away.
essential. We were just talking about planning and how well we plan this show all the time. I'm trying to take so I guess, we got 2 minutes here, right? I mean, I might as well say that, Dan has done historically over the course of the time we've been doing this show, like 94% of all the legwork is setting up guests and stuff like that. And usually I can pull a topic out of my ass in 5 minutes before the show. So that has been the extent of my preparation.
What the hell's he
Dan,
talking about?
I'm doing this for you. I'm trying to take the pressure off of you, at least when it's my week, to come up with an esteemed guest like David or, whoever that, so we can, it's not just me yelling at you all the time.
Yeah, but then
Like
I bring in Uwe, who blows away David. You know what I'm saying?
Well, you set this up and
It's true.
Where the hell, what a bunch of, here I am, still sober.
That's unfortunate.
And I had to send all new price lists to Europe because, things are going up. So I finally got my pricing shipped out with my new price levels to Europe. And I go, son of a gun, I wonder if it's 7:00 yet. And
Oops.
evidently not. The
David,
Oscars are on.
David, I'm
Here
joking.
we are.
It's because Uwe and I used to be friends in 1940. You know what I'm saying?
But your game looks really good, your second one you're thinking of. So I'm looking forward to checking it out when you get it out. But I want to say,
there you go.
It's great snow out here. We're finally getting some good cold weather.
It's coldish.
So why are you enjoying the cold weather, Uwe? I mean, don't you remember the East?
I'm a ski patrolman, man. I love if I don't have snow, I don't have anything to do at night.
Well, Uwe, are you in the snow belt?
We're right on the Lake Erie coast. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So yeah, you're in the snow belt then, unless you're west of Cleveland, I guess. But yeah, we're just south of the snow. We're in the secondary snow belt to the south. Let me put it that way. So we got a decent amount of snow, but not that much. So, we're not going to be able to talk about this tonight, I'm afraid. This honestly deserves its own show and deserves to be on a better channel than mine. So that's more relevant to what the D&D people are talking about right now. So I'm sure my legal department is on alert.
Next week, Uwe, I'm sorry. I went to work. I got distracted. And then I got your phone call while I was on the show. I read your message. I heard your message. Jesus Christ, I'm sorry. How do you say sorry in German?
Leider bin ich Italiener.
Yeah, you could do that too.
So, all right, folks. So
and
we are
out
of time. So Dan's poorly pronounced. Dan, I don't know if anybody else has noticed this, that Dan really tries super hard to pronounce all the languages correctly, especially Italian and French.
And sure
Makes no effort whatsoever on the German pronunciation whatsoever. I'm very disappointed by that. Just absolutely lackluster effort on your part with the German.
Das Mensch is yapping too much.
You see what I mean?
Well, hey, Artie, before we go, I have 2-second story real quick I gotta tell.
Go ahead.
All right. So my 13-year-old daughter comes home from school and she goes, Dad, at school in history class, we're learning about the War of 1812. I'm so excited. So you know what I told her? Hold on.
You're working on a game on the War of 1812?
I told her,
there you go.
Just the game for you.
There you go. I haven't played that one. I played the 1775 one, and I liked it quite a lot, actually.
The best 5-player game in existence.
Ooh, boy, better than Richard Berg's Dynasty. Wow.
So I have 2 favorite 5-player games: 1812 and Quartermaster General World War I.
Primogenita.
That is a great intro. Thank you so much, because we're finally had it reprinted and it's over its way from China to USA. So
everybody should
the
know
new 1812. Great.
Yep.
Great.
Old lady is asking me to pronounce a word. It's primogenita.
Primogenita. I'm not going to say it. I could make it. I could make a crass comment.
What's she saying about your genitals?
Oh, we're going to get demonetized. We're talking about the genitals now. So, all right, folks. Thanks to everybody. Thanks especially to Uwe, who has parachuted in it for the last 5 minutes of the show. It's all Dan's fault. Thank you, David. Thank everybody for coming by tonight. Don't forget that next week Dan has very detailed plans for next week's show that he has not seen fit to inform anybody of yet. So tune in at 7:30 over on his channel.
Uva's gonna be there.
In the meantime,
big move. Big. The moose is loose. Big move. Big. The moose is loose. Big move. Big. The moose is loose. Big.